and share. Yeah. All right, everybody see that okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good deal. All right, so just similar to the African traditional religion, here in the U.S. we have the Indigenous Native American religions as well, and overall there's not a great deal of difference. They believe in a spiritual realm, whether there's one God or not. It's whatever the God is. It's vague, and a great spirit or multiple beings involved at times. It just depends on the background. So we're just going to look at it generally, but what we're used to seeing in TV and movies and stuff, is of course only partially accurate. But up here you have a picture of a totem, but what we're familiar with are pictures such as these, and these are legitimately real pictures, and but it depended on the tribal area, how they dressed, and whether they lived in a teepee or a pueblo or in some kind of other type of shelter. But just like in Africa, you have them doing baskets and weaving and stuff like that as well. And so we're just going to touch on this a little bit and realize that this is a population in the U.S. That is still, um, were oppressed when the settlers came, and highly misunderstood from the settlers' perspective. And and they could have benefited by coming to understand the Indian cultures better. There were some missionaries who did try to do that, and even one that went and lived among them for a number of years, a particular group, and they were helpful. But there were other types of mission work that were done that were quite they weren't good representatives of what it was, what Christ would do. But so there were some abuses as well. Uh, so when we think of the U.S. and realize that when the Europeans came, um, even though it wasn't densely populated, they had Indian groups all over the place. And so this is a map that gives an idea of just, you had the Plains Indian, then you had those here in the Alabama area and around the Creek Indians and Chickasaw and others, but in the East, you had the Mohawks and a bunch of others. And you just realizing that this was a very active place, even though not highly populated. Now, the current total population of Native Americans in the United States is about 6.8 million, or a little over 2% of the population. But only 22% live in the tribal lands or on what we often call reservations, or as well. And I circled these three: Blackfoot, Kiowa, and Cherokee. These are three Indians in my ancestry. On my dad's side of the family, my grandmother, if you looked at her, she looked all of an Indian, and she fairly short. She had a longish nose that was passed down to our family, but she looked like a little Indian lady, and she was one tough lady. She had 20 kids. Give you an idea. My dad was the second oldest of 20, and but she had a lot of Cherokee and especially Blackfoot in her. She showed me a picture one time of her great grandfather. That's right. Yeah. And he looked like this guy here, except that he wore a hat, that European style hat on his head in the picture. But in either case, we have to remember that this is a group within the United States that was oppressed and did face a lot of issues with being pushed off their land to make room for the settlers, and ended up in areas that weren't the best land compared to what they had before. Um, so we'll see a lot of familiarity with the ATR religion here. They are animistic basically in their beliefs. And remember, animism is the belief and worship of spiritual beings, nature spirits, ancestral spirits that inhabit people, places, and objects. And that would be primarily, they would see this spiritual nature in all around them, in the world they live in, and they could take all kinds of different forms depending on the particular beliefs or practices. And but it was this animistic type of view. They didn't see a dichotomy between spiritual and physical nature of the world. They believe that the spiritual permeates all aspects of it. The totemism we've talked about a little bit, but just as a reminder, this is a belief in the kinship group of people with a common totem or representator, something that represented their particular group of people. And it could be an animal. Oftentimes it was an animal, but it could also be a plant or something out of nature that they would symbolize their particular clan. So not an idol that they worshiped, like some early missionaries thought. They were an oral society and have oral traditions handed down to them. I only know of one tribe that ever had their language translated into English, and that was the Cherokee Indians, I believe, had theirs, or maybe some others now, but they've lost a lot of their culture, and a lot of the languages have gone by the wayside. And so, but they're like African languages. They have a lot of oral traditions that have been passed down. So some of the information comes from these oral traditions that have been passed down through the ages. There's some archaeological findings that are used as well. So when you do have information about traditional African, traditional Native American Indians, some of it comes from missionary writings and documents, and you can find these and read about some of the things from some of the groups. There were missionaries working on the East Coast, for example. Indians were being pushed out, and the missionaries were helping the Indians to combat being pushed out, but also to find out how they could adjust to the living situation, given that they were being surrounded by all these people coming in that were not from their background. but really, compared to the number of Indians and the number of different places, there's not a lot written about them. So because there's many tribes, there's all kinds of different, just like in African traditional religion, a lot of different views, a lot of different cultural styles, the way they lived, based on, where they lived in the U.S. If they lived up in the northern regions, their living styles were different than living in the southern regions or in warmer versus colder climates. A number have a creator God. But again, he's like a lot of the African ones, remote, not concerned with people in our daily lives. They had the idea of a great spirit, but again, differing levels of how involved he was, but generally not involved and generally pretty remote. Uh, uh, they did believe in spiritual power and that it was around them and it kind of permeated the world, the animistic view of things. Uh, and so they could see a creator God in nature around them. And so for them, having some idea of this being above everything and creating everything was not an unusual belief among them. The Lakota, for example, have a spirit world called Wakantanka. Sounds like a toy of some sort, doesn't it? But it means all that is mysterious or sacred. It's not a personal name, Wakantanka, but it's describing that there is some spiritual dimension, and it's eternal, powerfully powerful, and it created the universe. But it sometimes is equated with the universe as if the natural world and the spiritual realm are all one. But again, remote, unapproachable. But they would have rituals related to, things that dealt with the relationship between the physical and the spiritual realm as well. They had what's called Wakampi. Within the Wakantanka are the individual spirits and gods who exercise control over everything. This is similar to ancestral spirits we talked about under African traditional, but there is this dynamic spiritual world going on around them, and it has something to do with everyday life. It's just like in African traditional religion. And but this world, the spiritual realm, is not easily comprehensible for humans. So that's why they have specialists like shamans or diviners, people who know how to navigate in this spiritual dimension and can communicate in that dimension and between humans and the spiritual world, which again, similar to what we saw in African traditional religion. So relationship with humanity, any object or being that has influence over a person's life is kind of a divine manifestation of divine power. So again, this mix of spiritual with the physical world can be seen in a whole variety of ways. And so it just would depend on the people group involved. Spirits can be helpful or harmful. It depends. You can offend them, and do things that are contrary to what they want, and that won't make them happy. But on the other hand, if you're carrying on to, usually it's the idea, if you're carrying on traditions of your tribe and your people, that keeps the ancestors happy. And, and they like to be honored, as ancestors. So you can appease them by keeping doing things, and some of the rituals are to do that. But doing what you normally do, take care of your family, name your kids according to tradition, live according to traditions. That's all something the spirits like. Or on the other hand, if you do something that's contrary to what the traditions say, that you can offend the spirit. Um, so the shamans, they understand and possess this spiritual insight. And so they act as these intermediaries between individuals and the spirit realm, or between the community and this sacred realm. And in some movies, you see shamans being portrayed in there, and but they have the special insight into that spiritual realm. The belief system, for the most part, they lived in harmony with nature around them, and so they saw, that they were a part of this ecosystem, as we call it today. But and they used the uh, things that nature provided, but they lived as much in harmony, which makes sense. They about had uh, to to survive. You had, for example, the Indians that lived off of buffalo, and the white man came and brought train tracks, and then they they would come in with their guns and just slaughter, hundreds and thousands and of these buffalo, and would decimate the buffalo herds, which for some Indians was their main food and clothing. They would use the hides. They didn't waste that, where the white guys come in and they are, just doing it for sport. And they had rituals that they would say, well, when they kill a buffalo, they'd give thanks to the Great Spirit or whatever, and say, that he's providing for them, and even thanking the animal for the life that he's giving by giving his life. So you have that kind of stuff going on. Um, for them, death, in their belief system, there was little fear of death. In some of them, there's like they looked at, there was two souls. One soul is the life or breath in the body, which would correlate very well with what the Old Testament says. And the free soul, the one that wanders during dreams and leaves during sickness. So there is idea of this eternal aspect of humanity. And if you look in the Bible, the word for soul is actually breath, and and God breathes into not only humans but to the animals the breath of life, the soul. But it also, the Bible talks about the spiritual aspect of humanity, the part created in God's image. And so you can see there's a tie. You could get a tie there to some of their traditional thinking. So after death, the free soul goes to the land of the dead. And so an afterlife is that, and it's very similar to the African one. You live your afterlife in the spiritual realm, but you're doing basically the same thing that you're doing in the physical realm. But it's usually a place of happiness, and but basically you're continuing your physical life on another plane of existence. Uh, and there are variations. Some of them, it's more like, well, if they remember your ancestors, that's how you continue your existence. And some traditions would have animals sacrificed at the death of a person that would be a guide into the spiritual realm and things like that. So there are a lot of variations, and to get to know any one group of people, you have to dig in deep into their particular traditions to find out what the specifics are. Um, Source of revelation or enlightenment. First is communing with the spirits. You have things like peyote. Uh, Everybody know what peyote is? You see them in movies, but it's just a hallucinogenic drug that comes out of a cactus bud that was easily available to some of the Indians of that back then. And they would use it, smoke it oftentimes, uh, and or chew it, and it would kind of give them this hallucinogenic high, and they would see that as taking them into the spirit realm. And so that was something that some of them practice. The sacred pipe, like I have up here, you know, that was used to create a connection between Wakantanka and humanity that we talked about earlier among the Lakota people, that you know, they wanted access to that spiritual realm and that pipe. Well, there's also the peace pipe that you hear about, and yeah, they did have those in which they share the pipe with people that they are making an agreement with, like a peace treaty and things like that. Uh, is there. Got sweat lodges. This is your early saunas. You know, if you wanted to, you know, in the uh, first century, even for Christianity, there were places people could go like that. But American Indians, some of them practice this, and there are various reasons for it, depending on the tribal group. But they would build fires in these very small enclosures with the animal skins over it, and then they heat these rocks up and then pour water on them and steam and so it was often associated with various purification types of ceremonies, or another way of having an experience with the spirits. There is also something called a vision quest, as a rite of passage to adulthood. And in the particular tribes that use this, there was a time that they would seek a vision, uh, and they kind of experience a symbolic type of death and rebirth. Uh, and they may find their guardian spirit. It may take the form of an animal or something like that, that is giving them guidance through this spiritual realm. And so there, this wasn't necessarily in every tribe, but some of them had this. Relationship to the spiritual realm basically was to live in harmony with nature. Um, you know, and I mentioned this earlier, that, you know, even when they hunted animals, they would apologize for killing the animal and things like that. So there is some truth in when you see in the movies sometimes when they say they, you know, they respected nature and things like that. There is truth in that. And so they use songs and drama and visions were all part of the experience of the spirit world. And if you go and visit some tribal areas, there are those that reenact some of their singing and dancing, and you can see that, and they can explain to you what this particular dance means. It was same African traditional religions, same thing. They had certain ceremonies that they would sing and dance, and they had specific songs they used for specific things. And so this would be the same thing here. Sacrifices, not as much, although among the Aztecs and Mayans, you can see human sacrifices, but it wasn't a high practice among American Indians. Taboos we talked about before, these regulations to avoid certain actions because it offends the spirit world. There are taboos related to dead people oftentimes. And so there are in a lot of traditions avoiding the dead, like among the Meru people that we looked at in the African tradition. If you were pregnant, you didn't go near a dead body. And that was part of the tradition in theirs. And so American Indian traditional religions had some of that as well. These ceremonies, here's a picture of one that's quite colorful, and they weren't necessarily a worship, they were ceremonies for various purposes. It could be something about weddings, or it could be something to ask rain dance you've often heard of. Yeah, they would do that kind of thing. Um, one type of dance was called the sun dance among the Plains tribes. In this one, they would do self-inflicting wounds to show their sacrificial nature towards Wonk Tonka. And so that's a particular one they would do. But there'd be singing, fasting, various ordeals that they might have to go through. And you know, but bathing in sweat houses and observing taboos would all be a part of that kind of aspects of various rituals they would go through depending on the particular group of people. The spiritual religious leaders, really, the closest you get to that is the type of shaman, medicine man or woman. They didn't have a priesthood or this hierarchy so much as far as religion is concerned. And the shaman basically would, they just go to the shaman to get some clarity on what's going on with the spiritual realm, especially if they think they're being negatively influenced by it. And of course, they're wanting to be sure they're not being cursed by the ancestors that causes sickness. Ultimate goal in African in Indigenous Native American, they'll eventually join the ancestors. And this is just a given that that's what happens when you die. It's not necessarily thought of as a better place so much, but it's a continuation of the life they currently have. And so just a little insight into American Indians today. Uh, uh, most American Indians have entered into the mainstream. I mean, the vast majority of them, you wouldn't even know they're American Indian. They've assimilated into the regular culture of that has made the U.S. what it is today. Um, you do have the early efforts of the government that tried to enforce and quickly changing their culture and getting them to assimilate. And so some of this was not well done and certainly detrimental to the Indian people. Others tried to do it in better ways, but it wasn't always done well. You got, like I mentioned earlier, the killing off of the buffalo was a major change for Indians because then their main for the Plains Indians, this was their main source, and that changed how they lived in their culture, and of course it made them a lot poorer as well. Peace treaties were often used as a guide for taking land, and they say, well, we're going to give you this land, we'll move you from here to there, but the land wasn't better, but because they had the superior numbers and force to do it, sometimes the Indians would rebel and have fight against it, but they were so highly outnumbered and outgunned that that was not likely to be successful. And you have successes. We see movies, like Custer's Last Stand. Well, Custer was not a particularly nice guy, and they call it a massacre because the Indians won it, but it's really they were fighting for a part of their livelihood. But today the reservations where they can live and practice their own cultural things, and not it kind of protects them from being assimilated. And so it allows them to continue some of the practice of their traditional life. But even then, there's a mixture. People are not just practicing the traditions. They may follow some of them, but again, they may be practicing another religion like Christianity or something else. But out of the Indians, Native Americans, 1.2 million live on 326 reservations scattered throughout the U.S. And so when you talk about 326 reservations, you can see that the population of the reservations are not huge necessarily. And some of the areas where these reservations are, it's not good areas for livelihood either. Here's a video. I don't know if you can see it. One of the things you see happening a lot is that because the reservations have different laws than the federal government, and they're allowed some autonomy, that they have become a place where you build casinos, like right here, not too far from the campus here in Wetumpka. There is, the Creek Indian have a casino, and so this has brought income into the Indian lands, but it also comes with the usual problems that come with gambling as well. But but they're trying to, because these areas are often very poor, they're trying to find ways to make a livelihood, and they suffer from a lot of the problems that come with drug abuse and unemployment, domestic violence, things like that are a big problem among reservation life a lot of times. I don't know if this thing will play to you. Let's see if this will show up. Just black. Can you guys see that? All right. Does it play?
Yes, sir. It plays.
I can't hear you.
It is playing, but I don't know if I can see. I can't hear any sound with it.
Oh, no sound with it? Huh. Okay. Well, you guys can maybe find that, but it basically gives a summary of the situation of American Indians, and I think it's well done. So, but that would be something worth watching. But it basically just saying that with the breakdown of their traditional life and things, they get in situations and poverty that are exacerbated by the life that's there. So uh, uh, there are people, Christians, working in these areas and trying to assist in that. So, all right, so that's available if you do it. You can just look up this title, What Life on a Native American Reservation is Really Like, and watch that on your own there. All right, so that is it. Any questions, comments, anybody has on that?
No, sir.